With less than 2 weeks until the presidential election, Emerson College Polling has released new polls on several key battleground states. Joining me now to help break down the latest numbers is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, Pennsylvania could end up being the state that decides the presidential election. The race has remained a toss-up over the last month, very little fluctuation. What does your latest polling show?
That's right. In Pennsylvania, there has been very little change since our last poll. We now see Trump at 49, Harris at 48, very few undecided. But we now do have a little bit broader early voter data. We see that Harris is ahead with about 68%. Now, that is off from where I think Biden was, closer to about 75%. But that would still be within the margin of error. It still makes her competitive in that early vote heading into Election Day. There's the same trend with late breakers that we've seen before. Harris gets 52% of those who decided within the last month or within the last week. But the bottom line here is that the clock is ticking. There are some undecided voters out there, but this is not great data for the Harris campaign. I would be a little worried, especially with how that early vote is looking.
Pennsylvania Democratic Senator Bob Casey is in a tight re-election race also in Pennsylvania. Casey has been running ahead of Harris in the polls, but Republican David McCormick seems to be inching closer. What are you seeing in this race?
That's right. We've seen Casey with the upper hand throughout this election. Currently, we have him at 47% with McCormick at 46. So that's effectively tied. On the plus side for Casey, though, he's winning independents by about 5%. And, among independents, though, 15% are still undecided. We also see that there's higher undecideds for folks who are under 50. Casey wins these folks otherwise very easily, but around 9% undecided overall for those folks who are under the age of 50. So I think that those are good signs for Casey. If turnout looks like 2020, then he should be able to capture some of those younger voters who haven't necessarily made up their minds yet or tuned in enough to make up their minds. But I think it's all good signs for him, even though this race is certainly competitive. It's just a 1-point race, effectively tied, but still looking good for Casey.
Your latest poll also focused on two other battleground states, North Carolina and Wisconsin. Has there been any clear shift in either of those states heading into Election Day?
Yeah, and it's a bit of the same story here. No clear shift. Both states are effectively tied as they have been for the past month or so. In North Carolina, we see Trump with about 50% and Harris at 48%. In Wisconsin, we see Trump with 49%, Harris 48%. Again, looking at these early voters, in North Carolina, we have a little bit larger sample size here, and we see that it's split about 51% for Trump, 49% for Harris. That is not great news for Harris. If I were her campaign, I would want to be running these numbers up as much as possibly could heading into Election Day when we'll see more Republicans voting. In Wisconsin, we have more limited data, but we see that Harris is winning that early vote 60-40. So a little bit still too early to tell. There's a high margin of error there. Then looking at North Carolina, Trump is in a good position with that EV, that early vote. I think Harris needs to really concentrate on turning out some of these younger voters, some of these minority voters. And then the bottom line in Wisconsin is, Harris does have a little bit of upside here. She has slightly higher favorability ratings. It's probably a better bet for her than North Carolina at this point, but some of the same story. She needs to turn out some of these younger voters as early as she can and run up the score, so to speak, as much as she can heading into Election Day.
The gender divide has been a major theme of polling in this campaign, with men more likely to favor Trump and women tilting toward Harris. What are we seeing this, and how is it impacting polling in these battleground states?
Yeah, we've seen this pretty consistently. Men are supporting Trump to a higher degree than women are supporting Harris. And that's true across these three states. So when we look at Wisconsin, we see that Trump is winning men by about 13 points. He's winning men by about 12 points in North Carolina and then by about 15 points in Pennsylvania. On the other side of this, we see Harris winning by single digits in these states. So that's a tough place to be if you're the Harris campaign. You certainly want to see those numbers increase. I think she needs to be in at least double digits among women in that final vote if she has any chance of winning these states on election day.
All right, Matt Taglia, Emerson College Polling. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
With just over 11 days until the election, some lawmakers and officials are concerned over new evidence of election interference from foreign adversaries like Iran, China, and Russia. NewsNation Washington correspondent Joe Khalil breaks down what we know.
Drew, we know that Iran, China, and Russia will continue to try to meddle in our elections through a number of different ways. We know they are already doing that now, and they're going to continue to do so. That's according to the top senator on the Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner. We had a chance to talk to him today. He highlighted a couple of things. Obviously, Iran, we know, has already successfully hacked into the Trump campaign's email server and tried to spread some of their stolen content. Warner says there's no doubt they will continue to try to do that again, even on a larger scale. And when it comes to Russia and China, they have been spreading misinformation and disinformation, continuing to do so. He says if we're worried about this period we're in now, before the election, his real concern is about the period after the election, assuming this is going to be another close race where you've got maybe a couple of points here and there separating the candidates and potential for one candidate to challenge the election results. He says elements like Russia and China, they are going to go rampant on efforts of disinformation, trying to sow confusion and chaos among American voters and even violence. Take a listen.
Particularly Russia and Iran want to do everything they can to undermine our democracy. And if that can lead to civil dissent or even violence, that's in their long-term goal. Absolutely.
And Drew, Senator Warner is also highlighting his effort, sending an email and a letter to the CEOs of companies that run website domains. He says elements like Russia and China and others have tried to buy up those domains and make deceptive names for websites so that they can use them to spread their disinformation. He is now sending this letter, putting them on notice, saying they need to do a better job of policing that. He says he doesn't think it's likely that they don't know this is happening on their sites. And basically, he says they've been turning the other way. Drew?
All right. Thank you, Joe Khalil. Boeing machinists have rejected a new labor contract. Their now 5-week-long strike continuing with no end in sight. Boeing's union voted 64% against the latest labor proposal. That included in that package was a 35% raise, a $7,000 ratification bonus, and increased 401k contributions. Union representatives spoke out after the rejection, saying in a statement, quote, "There are consequences when a company mistreats its workers year after year," end quote. Boeing is now reporting $6 billion in losses during the last quarter and $8 billion in losses from January through September. Over 33,000 Boeing workers took to the picket lines on September 13th. Boeing's CEO says getting to a deal and ending the strike is the company's priority. The Biden administration rolling out new rules for federal agencies regarding the development and use of artificial intelligence. The new order signed by President Biden Thursday directs agencies to ensure they use AI in a responsible way. The order also bars the use of AI in ways that would risk national security, democratic values, international norms, civil rights, privacy, and safety. This is just the latest effort by the Biden administration to regulate AI without the help of Congress. Last October, the White House announced a sweeping executive order to address some of the most glaring risks of the new technology. Arkansas may be sitting on top of a virtual gold mine. According to a release Monday from the U.S. Geological Survey, the state may have as much as 19 million tons of lithium buried underground. Lithium is used in rechargeable batteries for products like phones and cars and is listed as a critical mineral for a green energy transition. According to researchers with the USGA, a machine learning model trained on newly collected data, produced a map that predicted high lithium concentrations across southern Arkansas. Those researchers say anywhere between 5 and 19 million tons of lithium could be stored there, at least 9 times the projected global demand by 2030. Americans are casting their ballots early in droves. So far, more than 20 million people have voted, smashing pre-pandemic records. NewsNation's Connell McShane breaks down the numbers in today's Political Minute.
Less than 2 weeks to go, millions of votes already cast. I'm Connell McShane with NewsNation. You know, Americans in many states across the country are not waiting to head to the polls. Total early votes have already eclipsed 20 million. That number's rising fast. Most of the ballots are coming in by mail, but millions of Americans also are voting early at in-person voting places. You could expect the number to continue to rise before Election Day as more states open up their early voting places and as more Americans head to the polls. Now, in 2020, during the pandemic, more than 101 million voters cast early ballots. Most of those votes came in the last few weeks of the contest. You can see that October 18th, 2020, right about now in the election cycle, only 28 million voters had cast their ballots. Now, in 2016, which of course was a non-pandemic year, a total of 47 million Americans voted early. I'm Connell McShane. That's the NewsNation Political Minute.
That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.